Colombia, officially the Republic of Colombia, is a country situated in the northwest of South America, bordered to the northwest by Panama, to the east by Venezuela and Brazil, to the south by Ecuador and Peru, and it shares maritime limits with Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Jamaica, Dominican Republic and Haiti. It is a unitary, constitutional republic comprising 32 departments. The territory of what is now Colombia was originally inhabited by indigenous peoples including the Muisca, Quimbaya, and Terana. The Spanish arrived in 1499 and initiated a period of conquest and colonization, ultimately creating the Viceroyalty of New Granada, with its capital at Bogotá. Independence from Spain was won in 1819, but by 1830, Gran Colombia had collapsed with the secession of Venezuela and Ecuador. What is now Colombia and Panama emerged as the Republic of New Granada. The new nation experimented with federalism as the Granadine Confederation, and then the United States of Colombia, before the Republic of Colombia was finally declared in 1886. Panama seceded in 1903. Since the 1960s, the country has suffered from an asymmetric low-intensity armed conflict, which escalated in the 1990s, but then decreased from 2005 onward. Colombia is ethnically diverse, its people descending from the original native inhabitants, Spanish colonists, Africans originally brought to the country as slaves, and 20th-century immigrants from Europe and the Middle East, all contributing to a diverse cultural heritage. This has also been influenced by Colombia's varied geography, and the imposing landscape of the country has resulted in the development of very strong regional identities. The majority of the urban centers are located in the highlands of the Andes Mountains, but Colombian territory also encompasses Amazon rainforest, tropical grassland and both Caribbean and Pacific coastlines. Ecologically, Colombia is considered one of the world's 17 megadiverse countries, and of these, the most biodiverse per square kilometer. Colombia is a middle power and a regional actor with the fourth largest economy in Latin America, is part of the CIVETS group of 6 leading emerging markets and is an accessing member to the OECD. Colombia has a diversified economy with macroeconomic stability and favorable growth prospects in the long run. Etymology: the name Colombia is derived from the last name of Christopher Columbus. It was conceived by the Venezuelan revolutionary Francisco de Miranda as a reference to all the New World, but especially to those under the Spanish and Portuguese rule. The name was later adopted by the Republic of Colombia of 1819, formed out of the territories of the old Viceroyalty of New Granada. When Venezuela and Ecuador parted ways, the Cundinamarca region that remained became a new country, the Republic of New Granada. In 1858, New Granada officially changed its name to the Granadine Confederation, then in 1863 the United States of Colombia, before finally adopting its present name of the Republic of Colombia, in 1886. To refer to this country, the Colombian government uses the terms Colombia and República de Colombia. History: pre-Columbian era. Due to its location, the present territory of Colombia was a corridor of early human migration from Mesoamerica and the Caribbean to the Andes and Amazon. The oldest archaeological finds are from the Pubenza and El Totumo sites in the Magdalena Valley 100 kilometers southwest of Bogotá. These sites date from the Paleo-Indian period. At Puerto Hormiga and other sites, traces from the Archaic period have been found. Vestiges indicate that there was also early occupation in the regions of El Abra and Tequendama in Cundinamarca. The oldest pottery discovered in the Americas, found at San Jacinto, dates to 5000–4000 BCE. By 10,500 BCE, the territory of what is now Colombia was inhabited by Aboriginal people. Between 5000 and 1000 BCE, hunter-gatherer tribes transitioned to agrarian societies, fixed settlements were established, and pottery appeared. Beginning in the first millennium BCE, groups of Amerindians including the Muisca, Quimbaya, and Terrana developed the political system of Cacicazgos, with a pyramidal structure of power headed by caciques. The Muiscas inhabited mainly the area of what is now the departments of Boyacá and Cundinamarca High Plateau. They farmed maize, potato, quinoa and cotton, and traded gold, emeralds, blankets, ceramic handicrafts, coca and salt with neighboring nations. The Terrones inhabited northern Colombia in the isolated Andes mountain range of Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. The Quimbayash inhabited regions of the Cauca River Valley between the Occidental and Central Cordilleras. The Incas expanded their empire on the southwest part of the country. Spanish rule Alonso de Ojeda reached the Guajira Peninsula in 1499. Spanish explorers, led by Rodrigo de Bastidas, made the first exploration of the Caribbean littoral in 1500. Christopher Columbus navigated near the Caribbean in 1502. In 1508, Vasco Núñez de Balboa accompanied an expedition to the territory through the region of Gulf of Urubá, and they founded the town of Santa Maria la Antigua del Darien in 1510, the first stable settlement on the continent. Santa Marta was founded in 1525, and Cartagena in 1533. Spanish conquistador Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada led an expedition to the interior in April 1536, and christened the districts through which he passed New Kingdom of Granada. In August 1538, he founded provisionally its capital near the Muisca Cacicazgo of Bacatá, and named it Santa Fe. The name soon acquired a suffix and was called Santa Fe de Bogotá. Two other notable journeys by early conquistadors to the interior took place in the same period. Sebastián de Belalcázar, conqueror of Quito, traveled north and founded Cali in 1536, and Popayan in 1537. From 1536 to 1539, German conquistador Nicolaus Federmann crossed the Llanos Oriental and went over the Cordillera Oriental in a search for El Dorado, the city of gold. The legend and the gold would play a pivotal role in luring the Spanish and other Europeans to New Granada during the 16th and 17th centuries. In 1542, the region of New Granada, along with all other Spanish possessions in South America, became part of the Viceroyalty of Peru, with its capital at Lima. In 1547, New Granada became the Captaincy General of New Granada within the Viceroyalty. In 1549, the Royal Audiencia was created by a royal decree, and New Granada was ruled by the Royal Audience of Santa Fe de Bogotá, which at that time comprised the provinces of Santa Marta, Rio de San Juan, Popayan, Guayana and Cartagena. But important decisions were taken from the colony to Spain by the Council of the Indies. Indigenous peoples in New Granada experienced a decline in population due to conquest by the Spanish as well as Eurasian diseases, such as smallpox, to which they had no immunity. With the risk that the land was deserted, the Spanish crown sold properties to the governors, conquerors and their descendants, creating large farms and possession of mains. In the 16th century, Europeans began to bring slaves from Africa. To protect and exploit the indigenous peoples, several forms of land ownership and regulation were established: resguardos, encomiendas and haciendas. Repopulation was achieved by allowing colonization by farmers and their families who came from Spain. In 1717 the Viceroyalty of New Granada was originally created, and then it was temporarily removed to finally be re-established in 1739. The Viceroyalty had Santa Fe de Bogotá as its capital. This viceroyalty included some other provinces of Northwest and South America which had previously been under the jurisdiction of the viceroyalties of New Spain or Peru and correspond mainly to today's Venezuela, Ecuador and Panama. So, Bogotá became one of the principal administrative centers of the Spanish possessions in the New World, along with Lima and Mexico City, though it remained somewhat backward compared to those two cities in several economic and logistical ways. After Great Britain declared war on Spain in 1739, Cartagena quickly became the British forces' top target, but an upset Spanish victory during the War of Jenkinsea, a war with Great Britain for economic control of the Caribbean, cemented Spanish dominance in the Caribbean until the 7 Years' War. The 18th-century priest, botanist and mathematician José Celestino Mutis was delegated by Viceroy Antonio Caballero y Góngora to conduct an inventory of the nature of the New Granada. Started in 1783, this became known as the Royal Botanical Expedition to New Granada, which classified plants, wildlife and founded the first astronomical observatory in the city of Santa Fe de Bogotá. In July 1801, the Prussian scientist Alexander von Humboldt reached Santa Fe de Bogotá, where he met with Mutis. In addition, historical figures in the process of independence in New Granada emerged from the expedition as the astronomer Francisco José de Caldas, the scientist Francisco Antonio Zea, the zoologist George Tadeo Lozano and the painter Salvador Rizzo. Independence. Since the beginning of the periods of conquest and colonization, there were several rebel movements against Spanish rule, but most were either crushed or remained too weak to change the overall situation. The last one that sought outright independence from Spain sprang up around 1810, following the independence of Saint Domingue in 1804, which provided some support to the eventual leaders of this rebellion, Simon Bolivar and Francisco de Paula Santander. A movement was initiated by Antonio Nariño, who opposed Spanish centralism and led the opposition against the viceroyalty. Cartagena became independent in November 1811. Took place the formation of two independent governments which fought a civil war, a period known as the Foolish Fatherland. In 1811, the United Provinces of New Granada were proclaimed, headed by Camilo Torres Tenorio. Despite the successes of the rebellion, the emergence of two distinct ideological currents among the liberators gave rise to an internal clash which contributed to the reconquest of territory by the Spanish. The viceroyalty was restored under the command of Juan Samano, whose regime punished those who participated in the uprisings. The retribution stoked renewed rebellion, which, combined with a weakened Spain, made possible a successful rebellion led by the Venezuelan-born Simon Bolivar, who finally proclaimed independence in 1819. The pro-Spanish resistance was defeated in 1822 in the present territory of Colombia and in 1823 in Venezuela. The territory of the Viceroyalty of New Granada became the Republic of Colombia, organized as a union of the current territories of Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, Venezuela, parts of Guyana and Brazil and north of Marañón River. The Congress of Cúcuta in 1821 adopted a constitution for the new republic. Simon Bolivar became the first president of Colombia, and Francisco de Paula Santander was made vice president. However, the new republic was unstable and ended with the rupture of Venezuela and Ecuador in 1830. Colombia was the first constitutional government in South America, and the Liberal and Conservative parties, founded in 1848 and 1849 respectively, are two of the oldest surviving political parties in the Americas. Slavery was abolished in the country in 1851. Internal political and territorial divisions led to the secession of Venezuela and Ecuador in 1830. The so-called Department of Cundinamarca adopted the name Nueva Granada, which it kept until 1858 when it became the Confederación Granadina. After a two-year civil war in 1863, the United States of Colombia was created, lasting until 1886. When the country finally became known as the Republic of Colombia. Internal divisions remained between the bipartisan political forces, occasionally igniting very bloody civil wars, the most significant being the Thousand Days War. 20th century. The United States of America's intentions to influence the area led to the separation of the Department of Panama in 1903 and the establishment of it as a nation. The United States paid Colombia $25 million in 1921, 7 years after completion of the canal, for redress of President Roosevelt's role in the creation of Panama, and Colombia recognized Panama under the terms of the Thomson-Arusha Treaty. Colombia was engulfed in the war with Peru over a territorial dispute involving the Amazonas Department and its capital Leticia. Soon after, Colombia achieved some degree of political stability, which was interrupted by a bloody conflict that took place between the late 1940s and the early 1950s, a period known as La Violencia. Its cause was mainly mounting tensions between the two leading political parties, which subsequently ignited after the assassination of the Liberal presidential candidate Jorge Eliezer Gaitán on 9 April 1948. The ensuing riots in Bogotá, known as El Bogotazo, spread throughout the country and claimed the lives of at least 180,000 Colombians. Colombia entered the Korean War when Laureano Gómez was elected as president. It was the only Latin American country to join the war in a direct military role as an ally of the United States. Particularly important was the heroic resistance of the Colombian troops at Old Baldy. From 1953 to 1964, the violence between the two political parties decreased first when Gustavo Rojas deposed the president of Colombia in a coup d'état and negotiated with the guerrillas, and then under the military junta of General Gabriel Parris Gordillo. After Rojas' deposition, the Colombian Conservative Party and Colombian Liberal Party agreed to create the National Front, a coalition which would jointly govern the country. Under the deal, the presidency would alternate between conservatives and liberals every 4 years for 16 years. The two parties would have parity in all other elective offices. The National Front ended La Violencia, and National Front administrations attempted to institute far-reaching social and economic reforms in cooperation with the Alliance for Progress. In the end, the contradictions between each successive liberal and conservative administration made the results decidedly mixed. Despite the progress in certain sectors, many social and political problems continued, and guerrilla groups were formally created such as the FARC, ELN, EPL, MAQL, PRT and M19 to fight the government and political apparatus. Since the 1960s, the country has suffered from an asymmetric low-intensity armed conflict between the government forces, left-wing guerrilla groups and right-wing paramilitaries. The conflict escalated in the 1990s. The conflict in Colombia takes place mainly in remote rural areas or marginalized sectors of very difficult access. The United States has been heavily involved in the conflict since its beginnings, when in the early 1960s the U.S. government encouraged the Colombian military to attack leftist militias in rural Colombia. This was part of the U.S. fight against communism. On 4 July 1991, a new constitution was promulgated. The changes generated by the new constitution are viewed as positive by Colombian society. Recent history: during the presidency of Alvaro Uribe, the government applied more military pressure on the FARC and other outlawed groups. After the offensive, many security indicators improved. Since 2005, the violence has decreased significantly, with some paramilitary groups demobilizing as part of a controversial peace process. As a result, the guerrillas lost control of much of the territory they had once dominated. Colombia achieved a great decrease in cocaine production, leading White House Drug Czar Gil Kurlikovska to announce that Colombia is no longer the world's biggest producer of cocaine. In February 2008, millions of Colombians demonstrated against FARC. 26,648 FARC and ELN fighters have decided to demobilize since 2002. During these years, the military forces of the Republic of Colombia managed to be strengthened. The peace process in Colombia 2012 refers to the dialogue between the Colombian government and guerrilla of FARC-EP with the aim to find a political solution to the armed conflict. The Colombian government and rebel groups meet in Cuba. As of December 2015, the talks have led to significant breakthroughs. The government also began a process of assistance and reparation for victims of conflict. Colombia shows modest progress in the struggle to defend human rights, as expressed by HRW. In terms of international relations, Colombia has moved from a period of tension and animosity with Venezuela, towards a positive outlook and a spirit of cooperation. Colombia has also won a seat on the Security Council of the UN. Today, Colombia is the third largest oil producer in South America, and at the end of 2012 it was estimated Colombia was producing 1 million barrels a day. In 2014, the National Administrative Department of Statistics reported that 28.5% of the population were living below the poverty line, of which 8.1% in extreme poverty. 784,000 people have been lifted out of poverty. The government has also been developing a process of financial inclusion within the country's most vulnerable population. Recent economic growth has led to a considerable increase of new millionaires, including the new entrepreneurs, Colombians with a net worth exceeding $1 billion.